Hey, we have a recall alert for bread sold at retail locations in Maryland.
The chemical is called azodicarbonamide, and it's used to make the bread stronger, to strengthen the bread.
Dozens of artificial preservatives, sweeteners, and flavors, including some FDA-approved additives also found in pesticides, petroleum wax, and perfume.
Everyone eats bread. It's the universal comfort food. The crusty baguette, the golden slice of toast, the warm roll next to your dinner plate. We've been told it's the foundation of a healthy diet. We serve it at weddings, at funerals. It's what you bring to the table when there's nothing else to bring. Bread is sacred, familiar, safe. But what if I told you, the bread you eat today is nothing like the bread your great-grandmother pulled out of the oven? Not even close. The flour, the yeast, the process. It's all been hijacked, modified, and re-engineered in labs to create something that looks like bread, smells like bread, but isn't bread. It's a shell of what it once was. In ancient times, bread was made from just a few simple ingredients: stone-ground grains, water, salt, and natural fermentation. That's it. No chemicals, no conditioners, no bleaching agents or synthetic dough enhancers. The flour was alive, the crust was rustic, the process was slow, and the result, a nutrient-dense, gut-healing staple. Today, you're eating a highly processed, chemically altered food product, stripped of its nutrition, bloated with additives, and laced with ingredients that many countries have already banned. But here in the United States, it's just called whole wheat. It's marketed as healthy. It's marketed as heart-friendly. Some brands even slap on the word artisan, hoping the fancy label makes you forget what's really inside. And most people do, because no one questions bread. We've been conditioned to see it as harmless, essential, innocent, a warm, buttery hug. But beneath that golden crust lies a quiet conspiracy, one that's been building since the dawn of the industrial food era. It didn't happen overnight. First, they changed the way wheat was grown, hybridizing it, modifying it, stripping it of key proteins and minerals. Then, they altered how it was processed, grinding it in high-heat steel mills that kill off the living parts. And finally, they started adding things with long, complicated names, things with labels like conditioners, oxidizers, and bleaching agents. All to make it last longer, rise faster, look prettier. They weren't baking bread anymore. They were manufacturing it, and with every shortcut they took, the bread on your table became less real, less nourishing, more toxic. But the worst part? They knew exactly what they were doing. Because when you feed a population a staple that causes inflammation, messes with blood sugar, and disrupts the gut, you create a perfect customer for the pharmaceutical industry. And the food giants keep churning it out. Because hey, it's cheap to make, easy to sell, and no one's asking questions, until now. So next time you bite into a sandwich, ask yourself this: is this really bread, or is it just a soft, golden lie? Because the truth is hard to swallow. It all starts with flour, the soft, powdery foundation of almost everything we bake: bread, pasta, pastries, cookies, crackers. For centuries, flour was made by grinding whole grains between heavy stones. A slow, labor-intensive process, sure. But what it gave us was real food, living food. Flour that still contained the bran, the germ, the fiber, the oils, the enzymes. All the parts nature intended. All the parts your body needs. But then industry came along, and nature got left behind. In the late 1800s, stone mills were replaced with something faster: steel rollers. Machines that pulverized wheat at high speed, generating so much heat in the process, it killed off the living enzymes in the grain. At first, this seemed like progress. The flour was whiter, softer, more refined. It lasted longer on the shelf. But here's the dirty little secret. In refining wheat, they removed 30 essential nutrients. Let that sink in. 30. What they left behind was starch, empty, lifeless, a ghost of a grain. And it gets worse. Because once they stripped the wheat down to pure starch, they realized people were starting to get sick. Cases of pellagra, beriberi, anemia, once rare, began to climb. So the government stepped in, but not to fix the problem at its root. No, they just put a Band-Aid on it. In the 1940s, the US government made it mandatory to enrich white flour with synthetic versions of a few of the nutrients that were lost during processing, namely iron, niacin, thiamine, and riboflavin. Sounds helpful, right? But here's the kicker. The enrichment replaced only 5 of the 30-plus nutrients they removed. And the replacements? Synthetic, often less bioavailable, sometimes even harmful in excess. According to the Journal of Cereal Science, the refining process removes up to 80% of the wheat's vitamin E and nearly all of its essential fatty acids. And studies published in critical reviews in Food Science and Nutrition show that these nutrient losses significantly impact metabolic health, immunity, and gut function. But the flour industry didn't care, because now they had a product that was cheap to produce, looked clean and pretty, and could sit on store shelves for months, even years. Longer shelf life, bigger profits. And to make it even more appealing, they started bleaching it. That's right, bleaching your flour with chemical agents like chlorine dioxide and benzoyl peroxide. These aren't just for whitening. They also age the flour artificially, making it bake better in commercial ovens. But these chemicals come at a cost. Chlorine dioxide breaks down into a compound called Alloxan, used in labs to induce diabetes in rats. Yes, you heard that right. The same compound found in your sandwich bread is used to give lab animals diabetes. But no warning label, no mention on the packaging, just a clean white bag of all-purpose flour. And somehow, we're okay with that? So the next time you scoop that flour into a mixing bowl, ask yourself, are you baking with real food or a synthetic product designed for shelf stability, not human health? Because what used to be a source of life has been turned into something that slowly chips away at yours. Your bread is white, software, fluffy, uniform in texture. You slice it, toast it, smear it with butter or avocado, and it looks perfect. But what makes it that way? Why does modern bread look more like a beauty product than something from nature? The answer lies in a dark corner of the food industry, one that uses chemistry, not nutrition, to engineer the illusion of perfection. Because the truth is that pillowy white bread didn't come from grandma's oven. It came from a lab, and the secret behind its flawless appearance? Bleaching and bromating. Let's start with bleaching. Bleached flour is exactly what it sounds like. Flour that has been treated with chemicals to make it unnaturally white. One of the most common agents used is benzoyl peroxide. Yes, the same ingredient found in acne creams. Another is chlorine dioxide, which we mentioned earlier. It doesn't just bleach, it chemically alters the flour's protein structure, making it softer and easier to bake in mass production settings. That might sound harmless, until you realize that these bleaching agents have been linked to serious health risks. According to the Environmental Working Group, chlorine-based bleaching can create toxic byproducts like Alloxan, a compound that, in laboratory studies, has been shown to destroy insulin-producing cells in the pancreas. Researchers have literally used it to induce diabetes in animals. But somehow, it's still in our flour. And that's just step one. Because to give that bread an extra rise, an even softer crumb, and a longer shelf life, they use something even more dangerous. Potassium bromate, a flour improver. Sounds harmless, right? But potassium bromate is a known carcinogen. Let that sink in. According to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, potassium bromate is classified as a Group 2B carcinogen, meaning it's possibly carcinogenic to humans. In animal studies, it's been shown to cause tumors in the kidneys, thyroid, and other organs. The Center for Science and the Public Interest has repeatedly petitioned the FDA to ban its use. And guess what? It's already banned in the European Union, the UK, Brazil, Canada, and even China. But in the United States, it's still allowed, because as long as the final product shows no detectable levels, food manufacturers are in the clear. Even though research shows that in real-world baking conditions, traces of bromate often remain. And those traces, they build up, one slice at a time, one roll at a time. Until years later, your body's been storing and battling a chemical you never even knew you were eating. And why? So your sandwich bread could look fluffier? So it could rise higher, stay soft longer, and appeal to your eye on the supermarket shelf? This isn't food, it's chemical theater, a performance for your senses, carefully staged by the food industry, using substances that would be illegal in most of the world. But here in America, it's just business as usual. So next time you pick up that bag of bread, ask yourself, is this what real food is supposed to look like? Because sometimes perfect is the most dangerous thing on the shelf. Bread wasn't always addictive. It used to be simple, something you tore apart by hand and dipped into soup. Something that nourished your body, not hijacked your brain. But modern bread, it's a different beast entirely. Because today's bread isn't just food, it's engineered to be irresistible, to keep you reaching for slice after slice, and never feeling quite full. You see, behind every soft loaf and perfectly toasted bagel is a recipe laced with ingredients that don't belong. Ingredients your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize. It starts with sugar. Yes, sugar in your bread. Most commercial loaves, especially whole wheat or multigrain varieties, contain added sugars, often hidden behind names like high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, molasses, barley malt, or evaporated cane juice. Why? Because sugar triggers the release of dopamine in the brain, the same reward chemical involved in drug addiction. A study published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews found that sugar activates the brain's reward pathways in a way similar to cocaine. The more you eat, the more you crave. And when that sugar is paired with the comforting texture of warm bread, it's a trap. But sugar is just the beginning. Let's talk about dough conditioners. Names like azotic carbonamide, a chemical that doubles as a foaming agent in yoga mats, and L-cysteine, which is sometimes derived from human hair or duck feathers. Yes, actual hair and feathers. These additives make the dough more elastic, speed up the rising process, and improve shelf life. But they don't do anything for your health. In fact, azotic carbonamide has been banned in the EU and Australia due to concerns over its byproducts during baking, such as urethane, a possible human carcinogen, according to the World Health Organization. Yet in the US, it's allowed because it makes bread production faster, cheaper, and more uniform. And then there are emulsifiers, ingredients like monoglycerides and diglycerides used to blend oil and water and extend the bread's softness for weeks. But research published in Nature has shown that certain emulsifiers can disrupt the gut microbiome, inflame the intestinal lining, and contribute to metabolic disorders like obesity and insulin resistance. In other words, the bread you eat could be silently damaging your gut health while tricking your brain into eating more of it. Because the goal of industrial food is not to feed you, it's to hook you, to keep you coming back. Bread has become a gateway food, hyper-palatable, cheap, and falsely marketed as healthy. And the more you eat it, the more your body starts to rely on it as a comfort, as a craving, even as a need. But what you're craving isn't nourishment, it's the chemical reaction. It's the sugar spike, the brain buzz, the soft texture hitting every sensory button at once. This isn't an accident. It's not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Because when bread stops being food and becomes a product, addiction becomes the business model. And as long as you're hooked, they'll keep baking, not for your health, but for your consumption. There's a toxic ingredient lurking in your bread, one you've probably never heard of. You won't see it on the front of the package. You won't hear about it in commercials. But it's there, quietly baked into your breakfast, your sandwiches, your dinner rolls. Its name? Potassium bromate, a chemical oxidizer used to strengthen dough, help it rise higher, and create that light, airy texture the food industry loves so much. Sounds helpful, right? But here's what they don't tell you. Potassium bromate has been linked to cancer, and it's been banned in over 60 countries around the world, including the entire European Union, the UK, Brazil, Canada, and even China. But in the United States, still legal, still used, still unregulated. Why? Because here in the US, big food plays by a different set of rules. Let's break it down. Potassium bromate, or KBRO3, is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 2B carcinogen, meaning it is possibly carcinogenic to humans. In animal studies, it has been shown to cause tumors in the kidneys, thyroid, and even the lining of the stomach. A 1990 report from the National Toxicology Program found clear evidence of carcinogenic activity in rats exposed to potassium bromate. And yet, decades later, it's still in your food. How? Because the FDA allows it, based on one technicality. They claim that during the baking process, the chemical disappears. that it breaks down into harmless byproducts once exposed to high heat, but studies suggest otherwise. Independent research published in the Environmental Health Perspectives journal shows that bromate can survive the baking process in measurable amounts, especially in larger commercial loaves that aren't cooked all the way through. So the chemical that's supposed to vanish doesn't. It lingers. And it's not just in white bread. It's in hamburger buns, pizza dough, bagels, sub rolls. It's even in flour sold directly to bakeries. Because potassium bromate makes life easier for the manufacturer. It helps the dough rise faster. It prevents it from collapsing. It extends shelf life. And most importantly, it keeps the bread looking perfect. But at what cost? In 2015, the Center for Science and the Public Interest petitioned the FDA to ban potassium bromate. Again, they've been trying since the 1990s. Each time, the agency drags its feet, because the FDA doesn't just answer to science, it answers to lobbyists, to corporations, to industry insiders who know that without potassium bromate, their products would be more expensive to produce, less photogenic on shelves, and harder to standardize across the billion-dollar bread business. So big food fights to keep it in, quietly, behind closed doors, through legal loopholes and regulatory silence. Meanwhile, most Americans have no idea. They tear into a fresh bagel, toast a golden slice, pack a sandwich for their child's lunchbox, and unknowingly feed themselves a possible carcinogen. Not because they made a bad choice, but because they were never given the choice to begin with. This isn't just about bread. It's about the quiet collusion between industry and government. It's about how a known toxin, one the rest of the world has rejected, can still be considered generally recognized as safe here in the land of the free. So the next time you bite into that soft, fluffy roll, ask yourself, is this really food, or is it just another product of profit dressed up in a golden crust, hiding a bitter truth inside? After World War II, America changed. Soldiers came home. Suburbs spread like wildfire. Supermarkets replaced local markets. And suddenly, everything had to be faster, cheaper, easier, including bread. Before the war, bread was still made in small bakeries. It was baked fresh daily. It spoiled quickly. And that was okay, because it was alive, made from whole grains, fermented slowly, crafted with care. But that kind of bread didn't scale. It didn't fit the new model of America, an industrial powerhouse, feeding millions on conveyor belts of convenience. So the food industry stepped in, and bread was rebranded, re-engineered, reduced. No longer a sacred staple, just another product. Post-World War II, the US government began heavily subsidizing wheat production. Wheat became one of the most overproduced, overprocessed, and artificially supported crops in the country. According to USDA records, federal wheat subsidies have totaled billions over the past several decades, fueling a surplus of cheap, refined flour that could be sold, stored, and shipped for pennies. This wasn't about nutrition. It was about economics. The goal? Feed the growing population. Stock the shelves. Keep costs low and calories high. And what better vehicle than bread? By the 1950s, mass production techniques had taken over. Giant factory bakeries pumped out uniform loaves on an industrial scale. The process was fast. The ingredients were stripped down. The fermentation was rushed or skipped entirely. Enzymes and chemical leaveners replaced the slow magic of sourdough starters. What was once a 24-hour process now took just 2. The flour, refined, bleached, bromated. The yeast, artificially boosted. The flavor, gone. So they added sugar, oils, emulsifiers, preservatives, and wrapped it all in shiny plastic to sit on store shelves for weeks. This was the birth of modern bread, cheap, software, fluffy, long-lasting, and completely hollow. By the 1970s, white bread had become the norm in most American households. Whole grain breads were viewed as fringe, hippie food, and the food industry made sure it stayed that way, because refined bread was more profitable, more addictive, easier to produce in bulk. But here's the cost. The fiber was gone, the nutrients were gone, the fermentation, gone. And in its place, a filler food, empty calories dressed up as a daily essential, a slice of industrialized convenience made to keep your stomach full and your body dependent. This shift didn't happen by accident. It was part of a system, a web of policy decisions, corporate influence, and marketing campaigns that positioned bread as both a necessity and a neutral. something you never questioned, something that just came with every meal. But there's a reason type 2 diabetes, obesity, and chronic inflammation began rising at the same time industrial bread took over the American table. It's not just what's in the bread, it's what's missing from it. Real bread, when made properly, is a living food. It feeds your microbiome, it slows digestion, it supports your gut, your brain, your blood sugar. But this isn't real bread. It's a byproduct of war, of politics, of profit. It was never meant to nourish you. It was designed to fill you up, cheaply, quickly, and without question. So when we talk about bread today, we're not just talking about food. We're talking about a symbol of everything that's been lost in the name of convenience. And it's time to start asking, what else did we trade for that perfect plastic-wrapped slice? Enriched flour. It sounds good, doesn't it? Like something you want in your food, something nourishing, vital, fortified. You see the word enriched on the label, and your brain relaxes. It tells you, this must be better, this must be healthy. But what if I told you? That enrichment is one of the biggest nutritional scams ever sold to the American public. Let's go back to the beginning, when industrial roller mills started stripping wheat down to its core, removing the bran, the germ, the oils, the enzymes. They created a problem, a big one. People started getting sick. We're talking real deficiencies, pellagra, beriberi, iron deficiency, anemia, all caused by a lack of basic nutrients that were naturally present in whole grains, but removed in the name of shelf life. So instead of going back to stone ground flour, instead of reintroducing the whole grain, the food industry came up with a shortcut, a patch job, a public relations miracle. They called it enrichment. Starting in the 1940s, the US government mandated that certain vitamins be added back into white flour, specifically iron, niacin, vitamin B3, thiamine, B1, and riboflavin, B2. Later, folic acid was added to reduce birth defects. That's 5 nutrients. But the refining process removes dozens. According to the USDA, over 30 essential compounds are lost when whole wheat is processed into white flour. These include vitamin E, magnesium, selenium, fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats. But none of those are put back in. Enrichment doesn't restore the full nutritional value of whole grain, not even close. It's like burning down a house, then handing you 4 bricks and calling it rebuilt. And here's the kicker. Most of the nutrients added back are synthetic. They're cheaper, more shelf-stable, and easier to mass produce. But they don't always behave the same way in the body. For example, synthetic folic acid can cause problems in individuals with the MTHFR gene mutation, which affects how the body processes B vitamins. Up to 40% of the population may have this mutation, according to research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And synthetic iron? It's less bioavailable and can cause gastrointestinal issues when consumed in excess. But the label still says enriched. And to the average consumer, that word means health. They don't know that what's been taken away far outweighs what's been added. They don't know that enriched flour is still a nutritionally bankrupt product, one that spikes blood sugar, feeds inflammation, and lacks the compounds that once made bread a true source of nourishment. Even the Whole Grains Council admits that enrichment only replaces a fraction of what's lost. But those words, enriched, fortified, added nutrients, they're powerful. They create trust. They silence suspicion. They make the illusion complete. This isn't about feeding a population. It's about keeping production cheap and consumers calm. Because if people really knew what was missing from their daily bread, they might start asking questions. And that's the one thing the food industry can't afford. So they keep feeding us enriched lies, and we keep buying them, one slice at a time. Gluten. That word alone sparks debates. Food bloggers fear it, restaurants label it, supermarkets build entire aisles around avoiding it. But how did we get here? How did a simple protein in wheat, something humans have eaten for thousands of years, suddenly become a modern-day villain? The truth is, gluten didn't change, wheat did. For most of human history, wheat was a humble grain, tall, swaying in the wind, with deep roots and complex proteins. It was labor-intensive to grow, slow to harvest, and rich in nutrients. People fermented it for days, turning it into sourdoughs and rustic loaves that their bodies could digest. But in the 1950s and 60s, everything changed. A movement known as the Green Revolution swept across the globe, backed by governments, biotech companies, and massive agricultural interests. Their goal? Feed the world, solve hunger, maximize yields. So they began crossbreeding wheat. Not genetically modifying it at first, just aggressive hybridization. They wanted a shorter plant, one that wouldn't topple over, one that could be harvested by machine, one that grew faster and produced more grain per acre. The result? A new breed of wheat called semi-dwarf wheat. It was a miracle for industrial agriculture, but a disaster for your body. Because this new wheat didn't just grow shorter, it changed at a genetic level. According to research published in the journal Cereal Chemistry, modern wheat contains more chromosomes than its ancient ancestors. It's structurally different. The gluten content is different. The types of gluten are different. And that matters. Gluten isn't just one thing. It's a family of proteins, primarily gliadin and glutenin. The gliadin in modern wheat is far more inflammatory than what existed 100 years ago. In fact, Dr. Alessio Fasano, a Harvard researcher and leading expert on gluten, found that gliadin increases intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut, even in people without celiac disease. Let that sink in. Modern gluten may be triggering immune responses in the gut, even if you don't feel it. And it's not just the gluten. Modern wheat is sprayed with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, right before harvest to dry it out and make it easier to process. This herbicide has been classified by the World Health Organization as a probable carcinogen and has been shown to disrupt gut bacteria. So when you eat modern wheat, you're not just getting new gluten proteins, you're getting chemical residue. You're getting a product grown for scale, not for health. But Big Ag doesn't want you to know that, because wheat is one of the most profitable crops in the world. According to the USDA, the US grows over 1.6 billion bushels of wheat each year. It's baked into almost everything: bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, cookies, frozen meals. And as people start waking up to what's happened to their bodies, as more and more report bloating, fatigue, skin issues, and brain fog after eating bread, they're told it's just a fad, just a trend, just another food myth. But when nearly 1 in 5 Americans now actively avoids gluten, and when doctors and researchers continue to link it to chronic inflammation, digestive disorders, and autoimmune diseases, maybe it's not a trend, maybe it's a reaction, not to gluten itself, but to what wheat has become. And if that's true, then we need to stop blaming our bodies and start blaming the system that broke our food in the first place. You think it's gluten, the bloating, the fatigue, the brain fog that creeps in after a sandwich, a bowl of pasta, or a slice of toast. But what if it's not gluten at all? What if the real problem is something far more toxic, something sprayed on the wheat, not inside it? Glyphosate. It's the active ingredient in Roundup, the world's most widely used weed killer. Originally created by Monsanto, glyphosate has quietly infiltrated almost every corner of our food system. And now, it's nearly impossible to avoid. Glyphosate wasn't always part of the story. It didn't exist in our food supply until the 1970s. But over time, industrial agriculture found a shortcut. Today, more than 280 million pounds of glyphosate are sprayed on U.S. crops every year, according to the USDA and Environmental Working Group. And wheat? It's one of the most heavily treated. But here's the disturbing part. Wheat isn't even genetically modified to tolerate glyphosate like corn or soy. So why spray it? Because of something called desiccation. Just before harvest, farmers douse wheat fields with glyphosate to kill the plants and dry them out. This allows for faster, easier harvesting. No waiting, no guesswork. But there's a problem, because when glyphosate is applied so late in the growing cycle, it doesn't have time to break down. It stays on the wheat, which means it ends up in your bread, your cereal, your crackers, your cookies, and eventually it ends up in you. Tests from independent labs and watchdog organizations have revealed measurable levels of glyphosate in products lining American grocery store shelves, including foods marketed as natural, whole grain, or even healthy. Some of the worst results? Baby food, oatmeal, snack bars, breads. Once glyphosate enters your body, it doesn't just pass through unnoticed. It leaves a mark. According to peer-reviewed research in environmental health perspectives and toxicology reports, Glyphosate has been linked to gut microbiome disruption, increased intestinal permeability, known as leaky gut, immune system dysfunction, and endocrine disruption. Some studies suggest it may contribute to the rise in autoimmune diseases, metabolic disorders, and even neurological conditions. And in 2015, the World Health Organization classified glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen. That same year, lawsuits began piling up. By 2018, a California jury awarded $289 million to a man who developed terminal cancer after decades of Roundup exposure. The floodgates opened, billions of dollars in settlements followed. But the product, still on the market, still in your food, because here in the US, glyphosate isn't banned. It isn't even labeled. The FDA doesn't require companies to test for it or disclose it. So while other countries move to restrict or eliminate its use, we just keep spraying, keep harvesting, keep eating. And when you feel sick after eating bread, no one tells you to consider the chemicals. They blame the gluten. They blame your gut. They blame you. But maybe your body is trying to protect you. Maybe the pain, the swelling, the discomfort. That's your immune system reacting to the invisible poison baked into every slice. Not wheat, not gluten, but glyphosate. So ask yourself, is it really the bread that's making you sick? Or is it what's hiding inside it, unseen, unlabeled, and still perfectly legal? Because when food becomes a vehicle for chemical exposure, the problem isn't sensitivity. The problem is corruption. There's something off. You feel it after breakfast. The mental haze, the heaviness behind your eyes. You walk into a room and forget why. Your thoughts slow down. You lose focus. You blame it on stress, lack of sleep, maybe even age. But what if it's something else entirely? What if that brain fog, the sluggishness, the irritability, the short fuse has less to do with your mind and more to do with your bread? Because modern bread isn't just a simple carb, it's a chemical cocktail, and it's affecting more than your waistline. It's affecting your brain. Let's start with inflammation. According to research published in Nutrients and Frontiers in Immunology, chronic low-grade inflammation is now linked to a range of cognitive issues: brain fog, depression, anxiety, and even neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's. And one of the biggest triggers of that inflammation, the gut. That's where bread comes in. Modern wheat contains high levels of gliadin, a component of gluten that increases intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut. When your gut lining becomes compromised, undigested proteins and toxins can enter your bloodstream. Your immune system reacts. Inflammation spreads, and for many people, that inflammation reaches the brain. Dr. Alessio Fasano, a leading researcher at Harvard, has shown that gliadin can trigger zonulin release, an inflammatory marker that loosens the tight junctions in your intestinal wall. This reaction can occur even in people who don't have celiac disease. And that's just the beginning, because it's not just the gluten, it's the additives, the emulsifiers, the preservatives, the oxidizers. Take datum, short for diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides. It's used to strengthen dough and give bread that springy, chewy texture. But studies in nature have shown that emulsifiers like datum can alter gut microbiota and promote inflammation, factors that are now being linked to mood disorders and cognitive decline. Or azotocarbonamide, the infamous yoga mat chemical used in commercial breads as a dough conditioner. When baked, it breaks down into urea and semicarbazide, compounds that have raised concerns over potential carcinogenicity and neurological impact, especially in long-term exposure. Then there's the sugar. Yes, most breads today contain added sugars, sometimes under names you don't even recognize. These sugars spike your blood glucose, then crash it, leading to mental fatigue, irritability, and yes, brain fog. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high glycemic index foods, like white bread, are associated with higher levels of depression and fatigue in women. The link between blood sugar fluctuations and mental clarity isn't just real, it's well documented. So when you combine glyphosate-laced wheat with synthetic additives, with blood sugar spiking sugars, you're not just eating bread, you're feeding a system designed to disrupt your mind. The fog that rolls in after lunch, the mood swings that hit mid-afternoon, the forgetfulness, the overwhelm, the edge that never quite goes away. It could all trace back to the loaf in your pantry. And yet, no one's talking about it, because bread is supposed to be safe, familiar, harmless. But if it's affecting how you feel, how you think, how you function, is it really harmless? Or is it one of the most under-recognized threats to your mental clarity in the modern diet? Because when the brain starts to dim and no one can explain why, sometimes the answer isn't in your head, it's in your food. You walk into a grocery store in London, and the bread looks different. The labels read simpler, the ingredients are shorter, the colors are duller, but the bread, still fresh, still soft, still familiar. Then you come back to the US. The same brands, the same packaging, but the ingredients? Suddenly, there's a list of chemicals you've never heard of. So, what changed? Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Many of the additives that are banned in Europe are still perfectly legal in the United States, and companies know this. They intentionally make safer, cleaner versions of their products for countries with stricter regulations, while feeding Americans a different formula entirely. Let's talk about potassium bromate. We've already exposed it as a possible carcinogen linked to kidney and thyroid tumors in animals. It's banned in the European Union, Canada, the UK, Brazil, and many other nations. But here, it's allowed, no warning label, no restriction. Then there's azotocarbonamide, the infamous yoga mat chemical, used to bleach flour and condition dough, banned in Europe and Australia for potential respiratory issues and concerns over chemical byproducts. Still legal in the US, still in your bread. What about calcium propionate, used as a mold inhibitor to keep bread from going stale? Research published in Science Translational Medicine has linked it to increased levels of a fatty acid associated with behavior changes in animal studies, irritability, restlessness, and sleep disruption. Restricted or heavily monitored in the EU, yet fully approved here. And these aren't fringe chemicals, they're in name brands. Fast food, school lunches, grocery staples. Brands like McDonald's, Subway, Kellogg's, and Kraft have different recipes for different regions. Subway, for example, removed azotocarbonamide from its bread in the UK years ago due to consumer backlash, but continued using it in the US until public pressure forced a change. Why the double standard? Because they can get away with it. Because here in the US, our regulatory system doesn't prioritize precaution, it prioritizes proof. Unless there's overwhelming long-term evidence that an additive causes direct harm to humans, it stays on the market. That's the FDA's approach. But other countries take a different stance. The European Food Safety Authority, EFSA, for instance, often bans or restricts additives based on animal studies, early warning signs, or even just lack of sufficient safety data. They act with caution. We wait for lawsuits. And in the meantime, American consumers become the test subjects. We're told these additives are safe within limits. But what are those limits when you're eating bread every day? What are those limits when the average American diet is stacked with processed foods, each one containing a cocktail of unpronounceable ingredients? The problem isn't just the chemicals, it's the assumption that we'll never notice, that we'll never ask. But people are waking up. They're reading labels, they're comparing ingredients across borders, and they're asking the most basic, most powerful question of all. If these additives are too dangerous for Europe, why are they good enough for us? Because when a corporation reformulates a product for another country, but leaves the risk in yours, that's not business, that's betrayal. Follow the money. Because behind every slice of supermarket bread, every dollar loaf, every 100-foot bakery aisle is an empire, a system of corporate giants who don't just make bread, they control it. In the United States, just a handful of companies dominate the bread market. Grupo Bimbo, Flowers Foods, Campbell Soup Company. These names may not mean much at first glance, but they own the brands in your pantry. Wonder Bread, Nature's Own, Sara Lee, Pepperidge Farm, Dave's Killer Bread, all under corporate umbrellas. And what do they all have in common? They're not just selling bread, they're selling a product optimized for profit, made with the cheapest ingredients, backed by the longest shelf lives, and propped up by marketing campaigns that turn processed chemicals into family staples. Grupo Bimbo, for example, is the largest baking company in the world. Based in Mexico, it owns over 100 brands and operates in 33 countries. Its annual revenue, over $20 billion. And Flowers Foods, they rake in billions every year, owning brands like Nature's Own, Tasty Cake, and Wonder Bread. These companies aren't just baking bread, they're shaping policy, lobbying Congress, funding scientific research, influencing the FDA. According to data from OpenSecrets.org, food industry lobbyists spent over $175 million in just 1 year lobbying the US government. And you better believe the bread giants had a seat at that table, because if potassium bromate or azotocarbonamide were banned tomorrow, it would cost them. They'd have to reformulate, rework supply chains, invest in real ingredients, lose profits. So instead, they protect the system, keep the public confused, suppress the truth. And worst of all, they crush the competition. Independent bakeries, the ones using ancient grains, slow fermentation, real sourdough starters, they can't compete with the scale, the distribution, or the pricing of corporate bread. These small bakers are often forced to either sell out or shut down, because shelf space in grocery stores is bought, because regulations are written for factories, not kitchens, because mass production gets the subsidies, while small batch, nutrient-dense bread gets drowned out by noise and cost. And so the cycle continues. Cheap, chemical-laced bread floods the market. And the real thing? It becomes a luxury, harder to find, more expensive, less accessible to the people who need it most. Not because it has to be that way, but because a handful of corporations decided that profits matter more than public health. So when you see that $2 loaf on the shelf, ask yourself, who's really making the dough? Because the bread you eat isn't just the result of farming. It's the result of politics, of industry, of systems built to favor those with the deepest pockets. And every bite you take is part of a much bigger machine. The FDA knows. They've known for decades. They know about the potassium bromate in your bread. They know about the azotocarbonamide, the bleaches, the emulsifiers. They know these additives are linked to cancer, respiratory issues, gut inflammation, and hormone disruption. And yet, they do nothing. Because the Food and Drug Administration, the agency that's supposed to protect public health, doesn't operate the way you think it does. You imagine scientists in white coats, reading studies, testing products, banning harmful substances. But the reality? It's far messier, far more political. The FDA's system of approval is based largely on something called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And who gets to decide what's generally recognized? The manufacturers. In many cases, companies are allowed to self-certify that their ingredients are safe, without independent testing, without long-term studies, and without transparency. They just submit the paperwork, stamp it safe, and it goes into your food. That's not a conspiracy, that's policy. According to a 2010 report from the Government Accountability Office, the FDA doesn't even know how many substances are currently in the food supply under GRAS status. Many have never been reviewed by the agency at all. And even when there is evidence, studies that show danger, countries that have issued bans, the FDA stalls. They deflect. They wait. Take potassium bromate, banned in Europe in 1990, linked to cancer in animals, petitioned for removal by the Center for Science in the public interest multiple times. But the FDA still allows it. Their reasoning? It supposedly breaks down during baking. But as we already know, studies have shown that residues remain, and the risk, it's quietly ignored. Then there's azotocarbonamide, used in yoga mats and shoe soles, and somehow still used in American bread for decades. The World Health Organization linked it to respiratory issues. It was banned in the UK and Australia. But here, the FDA stood by and let it stay in your food until consumer pressure, not science, forced brands like Subway to phase it out. And glyphosate, the probable human carcinogen still sprayed on wheat and oats? The FDA didn't begin testing for it in food until 2016. That's 40 years after it entered the food system. The truth is, the FDA isn't just underfunded, it's conflicted. Many of the scientists and decision makers once worked for the very industries they're supposed to regulate. There's a revolving door between government and big food, and it spins fast. According to data published in the BMJ and Harvard Law, FDA advisory panels are often staffed with individuals who have financial ties to food and pharmaceutical companies. That's not regulation, that's collusion. And the cost? It's your health, your children's health, the long-term well-being of an entire generation raised on food that was never meant to nourish, only to sell. So when you look at that FDA-approved label, remember what it really means. It means someone lobbied harder. It means someone paid more. It means the science was there. But the will to act wasn't. The FDA knows. They've always known, and they chose silence. Not all bread is created equal. You already know that by now. But walk down the bread aisle and you'll see a sea of health claims. Whole grain, made with ancient wheat, heart healthy, non-GMO, multigrain. Words designed to comfort, to convince, but not necessarily to tell the truth. Because behind every wholesome-sounding phrase is a label, and that label never lies, if you know how to read it. Start with the first ingredient. If it says enriched wheat flour, you're already in trouble. That's refined white flour, stripped of nutrients, bleached, bromated, and sometimes sprayed with glyphosate before harvest. Enriched is a marketing bandage, not a badge of health. And if it says wheat flour, still not enough. That doesn't mean whole wheat. It just means flour from wheat, not that it contains the bran, germ, and fiber that make it whole. To spot real whole grain bread, the first ingredient must say 100% whole wheat flour, or whole grain, name of grain. If it doesn't start there, it's not what it seems. Next, look for the sugar. Most commercial bread has it, even the healthy ones. Cane sugar, high fructose corn syrup, molasses, honey, agave, dextrose. If it's in the top 3 ingredients, it's not bread. It's cake in disguise. And don't be fooled by buzzwords like multigrain. Multigrain just means more than one grain was used. It says nothing about whether those grains are whole or refined. A bread made from 5 types of processed flour can still be called multigrain. Now scan for the additives: azotocarbonamide, datum, mono and diglycerides, calcium propionate. These are red flags. They're not food. They're chemical stabilizers, dough conditioners, and shelf life extenders. They exist to make bread cheaper to produce, not better for your body. If the ingredient list reads like a science experiment, put it back. Real bread doesn't need more than 5 or 6 ingredients: flour, water, salt, yeast or starter, maybe olive oil, maybe honey, that's it. The longer the list, the worse it gets. Now check the fiber. A true whole grain bread will have at least 2 to 3 grams of fiber per slice. If it doesn't, it's likely been refined, regardless of the front label. Fiber is what feeds your gut bacteria, slows down digestion, keeps your blood sugar steady. Without it, bread becomes a blood sugar bomb. And finally, look at the packaging. Is the bread shelf-stable for weeks? Does it feel too soft to be real? That's not a good thing. Fresh bread goes stale quickly. If your bread lasts 3 weeks, it means it was designed to, not because it's better, but because it's preserved with things your body doesn't recognize. If you want the good stuff, look beyond the big brands. Check local bakeries, farmers markets. Even some refrigerated sections in health food stores carry real sourdough, made the old way. And remember, organic doesn't always mean healthy. Even organic bread can be loaded with sugar, processed grains, and additives. The only thing that matters is what's inside. So slow down, read, decode, because every ingredient tells a story. And in a world where even whole wheat can be a lie, knowing how to read the label may be your best defense. It might seem like a trend: sourdough starters bubbling on kitchen counters, heirloom wheat at artisan bakeries, loaves with crackling crusts and dark rustic edges. But this isn't nostalgia. This isn't some Instagram food fad. This is a return to something real, to something ancient, to something our bodies still recognize as food. Because real bread, the kind made with slow fermentation and ancestral grains, is not just better tasting. It's better for you. And in a world of ultra-processed, chemically engineered food products, reclaiming real bread might not just be smart, it might be necessary for survival. Let's start with sourdough. Real sourdough is made through natural fermentation, flour and water, left to sit, left to live. Wild yeast and beneficial bacteria begin breaking down the dough, pre-digesting the gluten, releasing nutrients, and creating lactic acid. It's slow, sometimes days, but it transforms the bread. Studies published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry show that sourdough fermentation lowers the glycemic index of bread, improves mineral absorption, and even reduces the inflammatory response in people sensitive to gluten, because when wheat is fermented the old way, the body doesn't fight it, it welcomes it. Compare that to modern bread, blasted with fast-acting yeast, rushed through production in 2 hours or less. That's not digestion, that's disruption. And then there's the wheat itself. Heirloom grains, like einkorn, spelt, and emmer, are nothing like modern wheat. They're lower in gluten, higher in protein, rich in micronutrients and antioxidants. They haven't been hybridized or stripped down for shelf life. They're grown the way wheat was grown for thousands of years. One study from Food Research International found that breads made from ancient grains caused significantly fewer gastrointestinal symptoms in sensitive individuals compared to bread made with modern wheat. And the flavor? It's complex, nutty, earthy, not because of flavor additives or enhancers, but because nature did the work. Real bread isn't supposed to be perfectly uniform. It isn't supposed to last 3 weeks in a bag. It's supposed to be alive. It's supposed to be handled with care. And yes, it costs more. It takes more time. But that cost, that time, that's the price of health. That's the price of truth. Because if we want to escape the industrial food system, if we want to protect our bodies, our brains, and our future, we need to go backwards, not forward. We need to support small bakers. Buy bread that's made with intention. Learn to make it ourselves even. Because once you taste real bread, once your body feels the difference, there's no going back. You don't crave the supermarket loaf anymore. You crave something deeper, something ancient, something alive. And maybe that's what we've lost. In the race for convenience, in the rush for shelf life, in the illusion of progress. But it's not gone forever. We can still reclaim it. One starter at a time, one grain at a time, one real loaf at a time. Not because it's trendy, but because it's human. And because our survival might just depend on it. So now you know the truth about your bread, the ingredients they hide, the chemicals they normalize, the system built not to feed you, but to use you. You've seen how something as simple, as sacred, as bread, has been twisted, refined, manipulated for profit. And maybe you're wondering, what now? The answer isn't fear. It's awareness. It's resistance. It's asking questions, reading labels, supporting the small bakers, reclaiming the bread that nourishes, not poisons. Because the more we know, the harder it becomes for them to lie. And the more we choose differently, the faster their system starts to crumble. So the next time you break bread, make sure it's real, make sure it's alive, make sure it's yours. If this video opened your eyes, share it. Leave a comment below. Let us know what shocked you the most. And subscribe for more, because we're just getting started.